But then you also have this concept, especially when you're talking about the kind of on the building level of a data center. You've got this concept that is quite widely used today, especially in some of these older data centers, is evaporative cooling. And that evaporative cooling system basically rejects heat using fans and water, and then that converts that water into water vapor, and then that is then released into the outside. That option consumes a lot of water.
It does.
But on the flip side, it's actually more energy efficient than your standard air conditioning. And the evaporative cooling type systems, this is a really good way from the data center's perspective, a way to manage their energy use in areas where power constrained grids exist, or they have limited access to renewable energy, right? In water stressed regions, like West Texas, where water needs to be prioritized for quality of life, not just for business use, that's where evaporative cooling really ought to be avoided.
Right.
Closed loop systems, in fact, the latest stat is that they can actually reduce water use by up to 70% from your standard evaporative cooling data center. That's significant. And then on top of that, which I think is why they mentioned in this article and what's going in Texas here by Google, is it's going to be paired with solar panel farm and battery storage, is because powering data centers with renewable sources of energy, like wind, like solar, what have you, actually even further reduces the need for the water consumption. And the more what you would call clean energy deployed to power these facilities across the board is going to reduce one's power consumption. On the business side of it, that reliance on less energy intensive apparatus like ACs moving towards that liquid cold closed loop cooling systems is on the business is actually going to cut down their operational costs significantly as well, and support basically the industry's ability to move to more sustainable practices. So add to that for me.
Well, the earlier generations of data centers, and the scale that we're talking about of what a common data center facility, which is usually between 4 and 6 buildings, campuses. You'll see some data centers that are located within city limits, like in Houston and in Dallas, Fort Worth area. A lot of them up there, very small, and they will utilize usually a closed loop system, a very water efficient system, even though they could use an evaporative cooling system, which is actually more efficient. It cools better, it cools faster, and it's more controllable. But what we've been told by the data centers that we're discussing, the prospect of coming to San Angelo with, is that they automatically they came right out of the shot and said we're using a closed loop system that is a closed system.
Yeah.
Once you charge the system, the only water use is really for break rooms and bathrooms. So once you charge the system, it's usually about between 1 and 2 million gallons per building. It's a single charge. Kind of like the radiator in your vehicle.
Yeah.
You don't constantly replace the water. You're just charging it one time, and it stays within the system. One of the companies even told us that the last thing they want is any kind of evaporation or bleed. There may be a very tiny amount of natural evaporation over a period of years, but that would be obviously very quickly replenished. Now, if you look at the earlier generations of data centers, most of them were situated near highly populated areas in colder climates. We've seen a lot of them, as you said, in Virginia, Loudoun County, which is really where most of the major data centers started in this country. Massive cluster of data centers in central Iowa. And we've spoken to the economic developer up in that area, understanding their experience with those. Those were older systems. They called those Gen 1s and Gen 2s. And oftentimes, because they're in a colder climate, they didn't have to rely as heavily on their evaporative cooling systems because
Right.
metaphorically, they said half the year they can just open the doors.
Mm-hmm.
It's very dry. It's very cold. Now, I'm sure they filter that air and they utilize the external ambient cold temperatures to help cool off the internals of the data center. So if you start to see data centers moving into southern areas, well, you don't really have that opportunity to have that natural
Ambient temperature.
ambient cold
Yeah.
air around your center. So you're going to be basically running your cooling system
Yep.
heavily all the time. And even then, you're seeing that those data centers, those Gen 3s and later generations, which we're talking about for the potentiality of our area and which we've seen in Dallas-Fort Worth, they use a closed-loop system. Even though they have the opportunity to offtake as much water as they really want to because
Mhm.
there's an abundance of it, they're all going to the closed-loop system just because it's just more environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
And it functions well for them. So they're willing to make those investments in a more expensive system, but it puts less pressure on the community's water supply. A
More
whole
environmentally,
lot less.
more environmentally responsible.
But it is. And you know, one of the things that you and I investigated when we started exploring, you know, discussions with these data centers that are very interested in the Concho Valley, is obviously what's your water usage. And they said, we're not going to build a multi-billion-dollar campus and then run out of water. That's a hard call to make to your data centers, to your hyperscaler tenants and your investors.
Sure.
Oops, we ran out of water. Not only have we agitated the community, we've now, you know, potentially used up more water than we thought we would. Now we've got a problem. They don't want that conversation. They want to avoid that completely. They want to make absolutely certain, not just for moral reasons that they're good stewards of the environment, but they have to make absolutely sure that they have a cooling system that doesn't rely on limited water. And so that was something that I found to be, you know, very encouraging, which is why you and I and our partners at the county and the city have been exploring further, pursuing some of these projects, as opposed to some of the projects that you and I were faced with 4 years ago, where we had some similar data center type developers. They were crypto miners. We figured that out. And they had a massive amount of power consumption and water consumption. And we told them no.
More so than even these projected data centers that are going in.
Massive. But they were under a lot of market pressure to get those facilities deployed. I think, and our partners collectively didn't feel that those were responsible developments in the community, and we told them to go elsewhere. And I don't know where they went, but
Not here.
I'm glad they didn't. And we wouldn't have permitted that. And that's one thing that I think that is important to mention is that one of the things that you and I do as economic representatives of both county and city stationed at the chamber gives us a certain degree of objectivity and perhaps even neutrality, to where we don't make the final decision on a development, but we certainly can advise our city council and our county commissioners and county judge as to what we, from a market perspective, think is wise